All right, here with our TSN MLB insider, Steve Phillips. Steve, this Blue Jays season went off the rails early and often. They have not met expectations. I think the first two guys that would tell us that would be Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins. And by the game, by the series, the outcries get louder here in Toronto and among the fan base, seeking change with those two individuals in particular. You're on the record saying you don't see it that way. You think Shapiro and Atkins deserve another kick at the can. Explain to us why you see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. They've made the playoffs in 3 of the last 4 years. Now, this year, they're not likely to make it. So they've made it in 3 of the last 4 years. You know, and over that 4-year time frame, they have the 6th best record in baseball. So you've got the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Braves and the Rays and the Astros with better records, but then the Blue Jays. And so, you know, if I were to say to you, hey, let them go, bring somebody in, and I told you the people you're going to bring in are going to make the playoffs in 3 of the next 4 years, you'd be like, okay, that'd be great. I'd love that. Give us a chance to try to get to the postseason. That's what these guys have done. And so if you're okay with that, then you should be okay with them. And so I look at it and say, yes, they made some mistakes this year. There's no question. They'll tell you that, you know, going with internal improvement was a flawed logic because you want guys to improve, but you understand other guys are going to fall back and regress a little bit. So they had a flawed plan this year, but we're talking about a group that made the playoffs in 3 or 4 years, and 1 year they didn't. They won 91 games, so they've had a lot of success over the last several years. And with that, I don't see why and how you can make a change.
Well, I would counter that with looking at the details of what happened come playoff time. And as you know, Steve, they have not won a game once they actually got there. And I understand what you're saying in terms of that micro level. You look at the last 3 or 4 years, they've had success. But if you pull it back and you look at the macro, Atkins and Shapiro have been on the job for 9 seasons now. That 2016 season, that was Alex Anthopoulos. That was Paul Beeston. That was their team. That team went to the ALCS. Since then, the clock started ticking for Shapiro and Atkins. They knew they had to tear it down. Bautista was running out, Encarnacion, Donaldson, etc. That's when the clock started ticking. This will be the 8th season based on that. That's an eternity in pro sports. Yes, they've made the playoffs a few times. One of them was the COVID year, and they were 30-30 that year. But they have not won a playoff game in 8 years. They also have a top 10 payroll. This year, they're a bottom 10 team with a bottom 10 farm system. So you go 8 years in pro sports without winning a playoff game, and you've been granted a lot of time, a lot of money. They've turned over the manager multiple times. I think when you scale it back, Steve, and you look at the whole thing, you realize, yes, they've done some good things, undoubtedly. And yes, over the last 3 or 4 years, they've had a good ball club, this year notwithstanding. But this farm system's not going to help them. The big club's not in a good spot right now. They've been granted a lot of money. That's difficult to really explain how they continue to get kicks at the can when they haven't won a playoff game and they're 9 years into this tenure.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The playoffs are a crapshoot in baseball. We know that. I mean, we saw last year 2 wildcard teams that ended up in the World Series. And so it's not the best teams that win. It's the team that plays the best, the team that gets hot. And, yeah, there have been some missteps in the postseason. I mean, last year, taking Barrios out and bringing Kikuchi in, it was a mistake. But I still look at it and think if you get there, you've got a chance to go to the World Series. And, you know, you look at the Dodgers, they've won 1 World Series back in 2020, the COVID season. They've not won a World Series since then. You look at the Orioles, they got swept in the playoffs last year. The Rays got swept in the playoffs last year. So it can happen to even the best franchises. I mean, the Rays are one of those teams that has a better record than the Blue Jays over the last few years. Now they do it with a lesser payroll, but they've done a really nice job. But I look at Toronto and think you've gone to the playoffs and you have every chance to get hot when you're there. And so I just look at it and think, you know what, the goal is get to the postseason and then see what happens. And that really is what they've been able to do. It takes a lot of work to build a team to get to the postseason. Then the 1 year you don't, you win 91 games and come up short. I can't judge them harshly for that. Yes, this year, mistakes. They settled for, instead of going for the big guys, they kept settling when they didn't get the answers they wanted. And there were some mistakes made, but they built it up. They made a playoff run. And now they've got to try to reconfigure this. I think they should get another kick at the can.
Well, and again, when Mark Shapiro arrived, he made it very clear to the fan base, him expressing to the fan base, he wants to build sustained success. And the last few years, again, they've been a team that's pushed up on 90-plus wins. Last year was 89, and they still got there. This year, they're not going to get anywhere close to it. But again, the farm system has to be very concerning here. They have a bottom third farm system. That was something Shapiro, by all accounts, based on reports, was very unhappy the way Anthopoulos handled things leading up to Shapiro's arrival. And clearly he is in a position now where he has not followed through on what he had to say. And you mentioned last year where they made mistakes. We all knew what they needed. They needed power bats. They needed to address the slugging issue, and they did not do that. They also came into a season having to understand last year they had near perfect health. It was almost an immaculate season when it came to that starting rotation and the bullpen. They've run into injuries, and their numbers have been bloated. As a result, because they don't have the depth here and they didn't address that depth, they're running into those issues. Yes, injuries is a part of it. Every team has to deal with it, but Mark Shapiro and Atkins have to know that as well. And I'm curious what you think could happen going into next season. Let's assume they both come back. And I think Shapiro likely will. I'm not sure about Atkins, but if Mark's here, Mark's a baseball guy. Yes, he's the president. Yes, he's a business guy. Yes, he's involved in terms of building out the park and marketing, but he's a baseball guy, as we both know. If they couldn't get it right last offseason, when the issues were glaring, why do you think they can get it right this upcoming offseason to make sure this year is simply a blip in the radar?
Yeah, I think they learn from their mistakes. I mean, that's the first part of it. The other thing is, to be realistic about what happened, they were in on Ohtani, and they waited and waited and waited. And then when he chose to go elsewhere, some of the guys they were hoping to maybe fall back upon went elsewhere as well. And so, and again, you're in on Ohtani, you've got to play it out. He's the biggest prize. He's your, plan A pursuit, and you go there. Then Bellinger priced himself out of the market. And so they looked at it and said, it's a non-starter. We've got to pivot. They pivoted back to Kiermaier. Kiermaier had a really good year in 2023. I didn't love it because I didn't think that he was going to be able to sustain that, but I understand why they went there. Then they waited for the other market to go. Where else would they go offensively? They bring in Justin Turner on a one-year deal. I like Justin Turner. Now, they lost out on left-handed bats. They lost out on balance to the lineup. And Chapman ended up leaving, so they had to piece together third base. I like Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. I like him as a role player. And so, yeah, they ended up settling. While they waited for plan A, they settled for plans B and C and D, mainly because the players chose to go another direction. They were in on Yamamoto. He chose to go to Los Angeles, so it wasn't a factor for them. They signed Yuriel Rodriguez, who I think is going to be a pretty good pitcher moving forward in the future. And so I think that I understand what happened to their offseason. Nobody wants to hear it as an excuse, but now they've got to go out and set out here at the trade deadline, both buy and sell, and then go into the offseason and reconfigure, retool this team, because there is a core here that has been to the playoffs in 3 of the last 4 years.
And as you mentioned, Steve, that trade deadline is rapidly approaching. That will likely show indication in terms of what the plan is moving forward for Atkins, Shapiro, and whether or not they're going to be here short term and if they're going to be here long term.